6 months ago, Jesus appeared to me in my study, and nothing has been the same since. The crowd expected a business update. Instead, Elon Musk dropped a confession that left the room breathless. Was it a breakdown or a divine encounter? What happened that night changed the world's most logical man forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lights inside the Austin Convention Center dimmed to a hush as 5,000 people leaned forward in their seats. Camera phones lit up like stars. Every seat was taken, every aisle filled. The audience had come expecting bold announcements, maybe a new Mars mission, a breakthrough in AI. But as Elon Musk walked to the podium, something was different. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't rushing. He stood there in complete silence, hands gripping the edges of the lectern. A long pause followed, so still you could hear someone cough in the back row. Then he looked up, eyes serious, almost heavy, and spoke in a voice both calm and shaking. "I need to tell you something that changed everything." The crowd froze. Elon paused again, as if weighing the risk of what he was about to share. Finally, he said, "What I'm about to say, even I wouldn't have believed a year ago. 6 months ago, Jesus appeared to me in my study." The words landed like thunder in a silent sky. People in the crowd froze mid-blink. Several phones tilted up to record, others lowered as if out of sudden respect. A low murmur passed through the room, unsure, disoriented. Elon stood still, hands unmoving on the podium, his eyes scanning the room as if to say, "I know how unbelievable this sounds." "I know what you're thinking," he said, a faint smile flickering and vanishing just as quickly. "You think maybe I finally snapped, that the stress, the pressure, the relentless pace finally broke me. You think I've lost it. But I've never seen more clearly than I do right now." He stepped slightly back from the mic, looked at the crowd again, and added, "This is not a PR stunt. This isn't a pitch. I didn't come here to sell you anything. I came to tell you the truth." A woman in the front row had her hand over her mouth. A man halfway back whispered something to his friend, only to be shushed. Elon's voice lowered again. "I was alone in my study. It was nearly midnight. I wasn't praying, I wasn't meditating. I was reading, just reading. And then..." He hesitated for the briefest second. Then he was there, not in a way you could see with your eyes, but in a way that was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. He said nothing for a moment, letting the weight of the statement settle. The crowd didn't know how to respond. Some stared at him wide-eyed, others squinted in confusion. A few shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable, as if reality itself had just bent in an unexpected direction. Elon inhaled slowly, then said, "For most of my life, I thought fulfillment came from building things. Companies, rockets, systems. I believed the next breakthrough would be the one that finally made me whole." He looked down, eyes soft with memory. "I was wrong. For a long time, I thought I was winning. That's the truth. I built companies, reshaped industries, turned science fiction into headlines. People called me a genius, a revolutionary, a pioneer. But somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I stopped hearing myself think, or feel, or care." There was this moment, about 7 months ago. We were in the middle of a quarterly board meeting. Profits were up. Our market cap had just hit a new record. Everyone around the table was celebrating. People were clapping, smiling, shaking hands. I was supposed to say something inspiring, something powerful, but I couldn't. I just stood up. No explanation. I walked out of the room, got in my car, and drove with no destination in mind. I ended up in a public park, one I hadn't set foot in since my early days in California. I sat on a bench, still in my suit, still with congratulatory texts flooding my phone. Across the playground, I saw kids laughing, chasing each other, their voices filled with joy. But I kept noticing the parents. Most of them were staring into their phones, scrolling, tapping, disconnected. And I saw myself in them, successful, present, but not really there, not where it mattered. That image stuck with me. The contrast between laughter and silence, between life and distraction. I realized I'd become a ghost in my own story. Later that night, I went home, sat in my study, and just stared at the floor. For hours. No music, no screen, just silence. And it hit me. I didn't know who I was anymore. I had every reason to feel fulfilled, and yet I felt nothing. No joy, no peace, no sense of meaning. And that's when something happened that hadn't happened in over 30 years. I dropped to my knees. I didn't even know what I was doing at first. I just knelt there, hands shaking. And then the words came out, quiet and broken. I said, "God, if you're real, I'm tired of pretending. I don't need you." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. Brutally honest. I admitted I was lost. I told God, or whoever might be listening, that I had tried everything, built everything, achieved everything, and still. I felt hollow. I said I didn't know the answers. I wasn't even sure of the questions anymore. No thunder rolled, no lights flickered, nothing dramatic happened, but I didn't feel alone in that moment. Not in the way I had before. The next morning I told myself I'd just had a moment, a lapse, maybe exhaustion. But the truth is, something had shifted. A crack had formed in the wall I'd spent my whole life building. I didn't know it yet, but that night on my knees, that moment of surrender, was the beginning of something I couldn't have predicted. A journey I didn't plan, and a transformation I couldn't engineer. And that was the night everything started to change, though I didn't know it yet. It was 2:47 in the morning. I remembered the exact time because the blue light of the digital clock was the only thing glowing in my office. I was surrounded by awards, patents, prototype models, handwritten thank you notes from world leaders. My inbox had messages from presidents, kings, CEOs, but in that moment none of it meant anything. I was exhausted, but couldn't sleep. Successful, but couldn't feel it. Alone, with everything, and yet somehow with nothing. I looked into the glass door across the room and caught my reflection. What I saw startled me. My face looked older than I remembered. My eyes were dull, lifeless. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My soul was empty. I'd chased every dream I could think of, turned them into reality, but the man in the reflection looked like he'd lost something vital along the way. I whispered, "Is this really it? Is this what it all amounts to?" That question lingered in my mind for days. I kept moving forward, of course, I always did, but that crack inside me was growing. Nothing I achieved felt good anymore. Everything was just muted. Then something unexpected happened. I was in San Francisco for a brief trip. Meetings, product previews, investor pitches, all business as usual. But one morning, I decided to go for a walk. No agenda, no destination, just a walk. I ended up in Golden Gate Park, a place I hadn't visited since my earliest startup days. That's when I saw him. An elderly man was sitting on a bench, surrounded by pigeons. He was sharing bits of his sandwich with them. His coat was worn, his shoes barely holding together. But his face was calm, peaceful, like he didn't have a care in the world. As I passed by, he looked up and said, "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world." I stopped. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't used to being spoken to like that. But he didn't flinch. He just watched me with these incredibly clear eyes. Eyes that had seen pain. Eyes that saw right through me. He patted the space beside him on the bench. I hesitated, then sat down. We didn't speak for a while, just watched the birds. Then, as if he could read my thoughts, he said, "You look like a man who's won every battle, but lost the war for his own soul." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me like that. It was like he reached into the deepest part of me and named what I couldn't. And what shocked me most was that I didn't feel judged. I felt seen. He told me he used to be like me, always running, always reaching, always believing that the next thing would finally make it all worth it. But every success just widened the gap inside him, until one day, he broke. And that's when he found peace, not in building more, but in surrendering everything. He looked straight at me and said, "I stopped trying to be God and started trying to know him." That line stuck with me. It haunted me. Because here was a man with nothing, no job, no home, no fame, and yet he radiated something I'd never had. Peace, purpose, clarity. Everything I thought success would bring me, he had found without any of it. I sat there on that bench long after he left, staring at the ground, unable to shake the feeling that I had just met someone who held a truth I'd been running from my whole life. That man had found something I couldn't buy, build, or invent. The encounter in the park left me shaken. I kept hearing the old man's words echo in my head. I stopped trying to be God and started trying to know him. But the moment I returned to my usual world, emails, deadlines, press conferences, it all felt distant again. Like I had stepped out of a dream and back into a machine that never stops running. Was I just tired, having some midlife crisis disguised as a spiritual awakening? Part of me wanted to brush it off, rationalize it, move on. But something deeper kept tugging at me, quietly but persistently. I couldn't silence it, no matter how hard I tried. A few nights later, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked into a bookstore. Not for tech, not for research, but for something I didn't fully understand. I asked the clerk where the Bibles were. He pointed, and I bought one without saying another word. That night, I sat in my study and opened it, unsure of where to begin. The pages felt strange in my hands, ancient, almost like I was reading a language I once knew but had long forgotten. I flipped through at random and landed on a story I vaguely remembered from childhood. The rich young ruler, a man who had done everything right, wealthy, moral, accomplished. He asked Jesus what he needed to do to inherit eternal life. Jesus told him to give away his possessions and follow him, and the man walked away, grieving. Because he had great wealth? I stopped reading. My heart was pounding. I saw myself in that man. I had everything he did, and yet I was just as restless, just as uncertain, just as unwilling to let go. That story stayed with me for days. It confronted me, gently but relentlessly. A week later, I found myself driving past a small church. On a whim, I parked, walked in. The service had already started, so I slipped into the back row, sunglasses on, hoping not to be recognized. I sat there, feeling like a stranger in a place I didn't belong. The music was soft. The people were quiet. But there was something different about the atmosphere. It wasn't manufactured or polished. It felt real, like everyone there was carrying something invisible but sacred. Then the pastor began speaking, and the moment he opened his mouth, I felt like he was speaking directly to me. Not about me, not to the crowd, but to the hollow part of my chest that I had been trying to ignore. He said, God doesn't want your success. He wants your surrender. He doesn't need your accomplishments. He wants your heart. I froze. Those words hit like lightning. I sat still, gripping the edge of the pew, trying to breathe. I didn't hear much else he said after that, because those 2 lines wouldn't leave me alone. I walked out after the service, sunglasses still on, head low. I made it to my car, closed the door, and then it happened. For the first time in my adult life, I cried. Not from frustration, not from stress, not from exhaustion. I cried because for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not for what I had done, not for what I could build or give, but simply for who I was. And that broke something open in me that I didn't even know was still locked away. 3 months passed. I kept going to church, quietly, anonymously. I read scripture almost every night. Some passages made no sense. Others cut through me like a knife. I didn't know what I was doing exactly. I just knew I couldn't go back to who I was before. Something inside me had shifted. I didn't want more success. I wanted something real. It was a late Tuesday night. The house was quiet. My kids were asleep. I was sitting in my study, the Bible open on my lap, reading from the Gospel of John. I don't even remember the exact verse. But suddenly the air in the room changed. Heaviness gave way to stillness. My skin tingled. Every sound outside disappeared, and then there was presence, not fear, not confusion, just presence. It wasn't physical, not in the way we understand it, but it was real, more real than anything I had ever known. I didn't see a figure with my eyes, but I felt him, Jesus. Not the abstract religious symbol I had filed away in my mind, not the stained glass figure from cathedrals or childhood stories. This was personal, present, alive. My heart pounded. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't hallucinating. I was wide awake, fully aware, and completely undone. I didn't know what to do except, "Speak," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Tears welled up before I could stop them. "I'm sorry I tried to build a world without you. I thought I could carry the weight of everything on my own. I thought I didn't need anyone. I thought I didn't need you." And in that stillness, I didn't hear an audible voice, but something deeper spoke. A response that didn't come from outside, but from within. Clearer than any thought I've ever had. "I know," it said. "I've known. That's why I never stopped calling you." I broke. The man who had stood on stages, launched rockets, managed empires. I crumbled in that chair. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finally free. I felt layers peeling away. Pride, pressure, shame, performance. All the things I thought made me strong were falling off like dust, and what was left was just me. A man, a son, a soul that had finally come home. I didn't want anything in that moment. Not success, not answers, just him. Just peace. I closed my eyes and sat in silence, tears rolling down my face, whispering words that came straight from the center of my heart. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for loving me when I didn't even know what love meant. Thank you for seeing through the walls I built and still choosing to meet me here. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours. But when it lifted, something inside me was different. The hole that had ached for decades was gone. Not patched, not ignored, filled. Not with accomplishment or comfort, but with love. A love that wasn't earned or measured. It just was. I sat there until the sun began to rise, watching light fill the room. My hands still trembled, my face still wet with tears, but I had never felt more whole. That night, I didn't go online. I didn't text anyone. I didn't document anything. because that moment wasn't for the world. It was for me. I wasn't a tech giant anymore. There was a man who had just come home. The days that followed were different, subtly at first, but undeniably. My children noticed it before anyone else. "You're really listening now," one of them said during dinner, and they were right. I wasn't thinking about the next meeting or mentally editing my to-do list. I was there, fully present in the moment. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing towards something invisible. I was content to just be. At work, people started to notice a shift too. I wasn't barking orders or chasing deadlines with the same ferocity. I still cared about excellence, but the fear behind it was gone. It wasn't about proving something anymore. It was about building with purpose, leading with love, honoring people instead of pressuring them. Then came the first real test. One of our major projects, a launch years in the making, hit a catastrophic setback. The kind that could tank investor confidence, sink timelines, and cost billions. Normally, I would have gone into overdrive. Emergency meetings, sleepless nights, pressure on every department. But instead, I gathered the team. They expected a strategy session. What they got was something else. I stood in front of them and said, "Before we talk about solutions, I need to tell you something about what's been happening in my life, about what's changed." And I told them everything. The emptiness, the search, the park bench, the Bible, the encounter in my study. Some looked stunned, some were skeptical, a few looked moved, but no one interrupted. I told them I wasn't interested in leading from fear anymore. I said, "We used to work from restlessness. Now we work from rest." We ended the meeting in prayer. 3 days later, during another quiet team gathering, one of our younger engineers, usually reserved, shared an idea no one had considered. It was simple, elegant, and within reach. It solved the problem entirely. The atmosphere in the room shifted from anxiety to awe. But it wasn't just about business. The real change was happening deep within. Word began to spread, not through headlines or press releases, but quietly, one conversation at a time. A few tech leaders reached out to me in private, men and women I respected, people who had accomplished incredible things. But their messages weren't about innovation or investment. They were about emptiness. One of them wrote, "I have everything I ever wanted, but I feel like I'm drowning." Another asked, "Is it real? What happened to you?" And I told them what I now knew to be true. That emptiness isn't punishment. It's an invitation. It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that your soul is asking for something deeper. I started speaking more openly, not as a crusader, not to convince, but to share. And when people heard the change in my voice, the calm in my posture, the peace that replaced the urgency, they leaned in. At my companies, the culture shifted. Slowly, then noticeably. We began starting meetings with prayer. Not forced, not formal, just honest. Space for gratitude, for clarity, for humility. We began running decisions through a different filter, not just what will this build, but who does this serve? People noticed the difference. Team members said they felt lighter, more focused, more united. We weren't just building systems anymore. We were building from a different source. Love, not fear. Then came the interview that changed everything. The host asked me, "What's the biggest discovery you've made in the last 10 years?" I didn't hesitate. I said, "I spent decades trying to reach Mars, but I had to come back to Earth to find heaven." That line went viral, but it wasn't about the attention. It was about the recognition. People around the world saw themselves in it, in the chase, in the emptiness, in the longing, and they began to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something more. This wasn't a religious phase. This was a new identity. Elon stood still at the podium, the room wrapped in complete silence. Every eye was fixed on him. Every heart seemed to be holding its breath. The same man who once spoke of colonizing planets, of conquering gravity and time, now spoke with a calmness far greater than ambition, a peace deeper than invention. He looked out across the crowd and said, "Jesus didn't come to make me more successful. He came to give me a new life." There was no performance in his voice, no pretense, just quiet conviction. "If you feel empty," he continued, "if you've chased every dream, climbed every mountain, and still feel like something's missing, stop running. Start kneeling." He let the words settle, because the most important journey I've ever taken wasn't to Mars. It wasn't to the stars. It was to the heart of God. Some people in the crowd were in tears. Others sat frozen, their own stories rising quietly in their minds. But no one doubted they were witnessing something sacred. "I used to think the world needed my brilliance," Elon said. "But what it really needed was my honesty, my surrender, my heart." He paused one last time, looked down for a moment, and then back at the thousands before him. "And what I'm telling you now," he said softly, "is the clearest I've ever been." A long pause. Then, with eyes full of something the world had never seen in him before, humility, love, peace, he said his final words, "Jesus didn't just change my life, he gave me a new one."